Market sentiment on Wall Street is shaped on Tuesday by fears and uncertainty, the elections and corporate news. InstaForex analysts are ready to share their forecast and in-depth market analysis. The benchmark stock indexes closed yesterday in the red. The Dow Jones lost almost 500 points. The S&P 500 closed with the sharpest intraday losses for the last months. The Dow Jones tumbled by 1.4% or 483 points. The Nasdaq sank 1.9%, weighed down by pessimism. The S&P 500 crossed the landmark level of 4,000 and lost 1.8% to close at 3,998 points. The three major stock indexes traded cautiously and mixed in the New York pre-market. Due to vague prospects and anxiety, the S&P 500 is expected to trade in the intraday corridor between 3,960 and 4,040 points. The strength of the US economy is a bad omen for the stock market. Investors are again stoking fears about further aggressive monetary tightening by the US Fed. Such upbeat figures cemented fears that the US economy is unwilling to cool down despite a year of aggressive rate hikes. Nevertheless, this picture still assures investors that the US Fed will soften the pace of rate hikes and raise the funds rate by 50 basis points instead of 7 basis points. Besides, the market expects the Fed to keep interest rates at elevated levels longer than anticipated. Against this background, three Wall Street indexes closed on Monday at the lowest levels in a week. The S&P 500 showed the worst intraday performance for months. The week's index for Wall Street surged from an 8-month low. Investors were also discouraged by corporate news. Tesla shares plunged by more than 6% after investors digested corporate reports and made a forecast of a contraction in output rates. The e-vehicles facility in Shanghai might slash production rates of the Y model by 20% of its full capacity. The contraction might happen this week. On a Tuesday, stocks are on track to a 30th day of losses in a row. Futures in the US stock indexes declined after a sell-off on Wall Street. Investors are shifting focus towards the second round of the elections in Georgia, which could determine the fate of the Senate. The runoff race to the Senate in Georgia is accelerating between Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock and Trump-backed Republican Herschel Walker. If Warnock wins, his party will obtain the absolute majority in the Senate and will have influence over committee and court rulings. Walker's victory will increase the chance of the Republicans to block the agenda of Joe Biden. The split government with a Democrat in the White House has been beneficial for stock markets because this opens the way to standoff between the parties in terms of controversial policy changes, for example, a cap on the federal debt. The market sentiment also depends on a few companies. The medical sector might come under pressure due to lawsuits against vaccine-producing companies. As for the high-tech sector, Facebook's parent company Meta Platform threatened to delete news from its social media platform unless Congress accepts the proposal to simplify collective talks between news agencies and the high-tech giants like Alphabet, Google and Facebook. US lawmakers are considering adding the Journalism Competition and Preservation Act to an annual defense bill as a way to help the struggling local news industry. Obviously, there are no preconditions for an upward reversal in the US stocks. At the same time, the benchmark indexes are unwilling to retreat from their November highs. The US dollar is trading lower again after rally on Monday. The index opened the week on an optimistic note. Amid the upbeat macroeconomic data, it climbed above 105 points, hovering at around this level on Tuesday. The index dipped 0.2% intraday. It's likely to trade in the corridor between 104.80 and 105.60 today. The US dollar index consolidated its gains at about 105 points because of the worries that the US Fed could push ahead with the sharp rate hikes. Indeed, the ISM non-manufacturing PMI and the strong non-farm payrolls for November published last week provide the arguments for further aggressive tightening. Previously, Fed's policymakers spoke in favor of a moderation in the pace of rate hikes. The Fed Watch tool indicates the 91% likelihood that the US Central Bank could increase interest rates by a half a percentage point at the meeting on December 13 and 14. The official funds rate is expected to reach its peak at 5% on May 2023. The US Fed should respond to a slowdown in the economy by a rate decrease. Nowadays, the annual CPI rate is threefold higher than the target rate at 2%, so it's premature to speak about softening monetary policy. The Canadian dollar was shaken by the US dollar's rally and a considerable fall in oil prices. The loonie is extending its weakness, having climbed by 0.36% on Tuesday. The USD CAD pays are trading at 1.3834 within the intraday corridor between 1.3580 and 1.3690. The loonie finds it difficult to grow on the back of a decline in oil prices. On Monday, crude futures logged the steepest intraday fall for the last 2 weeks for the same reason. The ISM non-manufacturing PMI gives the US Fed the leeway to go ahead with the sharp rate hikes. Brent futures dropped another 1.66% to trade at $81.31 a barrel. WTI futures shed 1.39% to trade at $75.68 a barrel. The looming policy meeting of the Bank of Canada is putting a lid on the loonie. The market predicts that the Canadian economy will go through a severe challenge soon: a slump in domestic consumption, weak demand in the United States, and a crash in the global oil prices. The Bank of Canada wants the domestic economy to slow down from overheated levels to bring down inflation. The regulator is likely to announce a modest rate hike of 25 basis points. The crypto market is overwhelmed by pessimism, except rare tokens and Bitcoin. The flagship crypto is cooling to the level of $17,000. The news on the crypto industry does not encourage investors. The US anti-fraud agency confirmed on Monday that its investigation several crypto firms for alleged misconduct. The Federal Trade Commission spokesperson declined to name the firm or say precisely what actions prompted the investigations. Goldman Sachs is going to spend millions of dollars on purchases and investments in crypto companies whose valuations have been hit after the crash of FTX. Today, digital assets reflect the correlation with the high-tech sector, keeping on falling amid the risk of mood. Bitcoin is expected to trade in the same range between $16,800 and $17,200 until the price escapes from one of its borders. Insta Forex analysts are keeping close tabs on developments in global financial markets. See you online soon.